Well, you can start looking at what the lack of empathy is. And so it's usually going to be a form of contraction, and a very deep identification with a story about you and about another. And so it's going to be some kind of judgment. Or there's a worldview, a narrative that you are having, but it's not necessarily what the other person, what their reality is. And so the more you can see that, and in a sense question that belief, the belief in your narrative, you start moving towards empathy. Because the belief in your own narrative creates a false sense of separation. And so what I'm pointing to will shift the sense of what you are towards something that is a lot more open, and a lot closer to what the other person also is. And it's going to shift you towards vulnerability, because you're going to be able to live in more uncertainty. If you question your narrative is contracting you and giving you a sense of control, a sense of understanding reality, and it's limiting. But there's a sense of safety in that control. And it's not only going to cut you off from the other person's reality, it's cutting you off from your own. It's cutting you off from your own deep feeling. Because ultimately it's controlling what you feel. And so the more you shift out of that, like seeing that those are beliefs, that narrative is just a narrative, and it's not an absolute representation of reality, you'll be more open. And that subjectivity, that we're using the word subjectivity, that presence, that beingness, that intimacy with life is going to be a lot more accepting, a lot more vulnerable, a lot more open. And at the deepest place, that beingness will be known to be the same as the beingness of another. And so that's going to create a lot more harmony versus a me versus them, and that's going to bring down barriers, defenses, because you can be okay no matter what the other person is going through or feeling. And when you're okay, you can be open to what they're feeling. To a point where you can actually feel what they're feeling. And that acceptance and that connection at the feeling level starts to move towards what we call empathy. I don't know if that was clear. You'll start to see when there's that connectivity and that attunement, because you could also communicate it. And so there's going to be mirroring, some form of understanding that there's an attunement. And so what non-duality is pointing to is not that there isn't another person. Like there are objects, there are bodies, there are beings, there are planets. But that non-duality is that at a deeper place, there is no separation. So your body-mind is not completely separated from the other person. That is a false belief. Just like in physics, up until not that long ago, society believed that objects are completely separate. They believe in atoms as fully separate objects. Only in the last 100 years, the understanding and that very profound non-separation is happening at the level of physics. But if you think of that, the body of what you are is not separated from the rest of the universe. It's also not separated from other people. And you can discover that that connection is actually a lot more profound. And so that's where the non-duality, in a sense, is. So there's a sense of a shared being. And the beauty is that it's that combination of a separate point of view at one level and the shared being at another level. But the beauty is that the separate point of view, for example, between you and Rose, creates the possibility of that experience of loving another. And in a very deep place, there's a shared being. There's ways to approach that. There's several paths. One of them can be quite rational. But it doesn't have to. It depends on what works for a specific person in a specific time. One way to point to it in a more rational sense is for my consciousness to communicate with yours, they have to be connected. And if they're connected, they can't be two. Because my consciousness is my reality and your consciousness is your reality. But if they're communicating, they have to be part of a bigger reality that is one. And that's a logical pointer. But the truth of what it points to can be discovered and felt very deeply. And then seen as something so obvious that you can't believe how you didn't see it before. When we were born, we were that. So it wasn't lost. It's just overlooked. What we long for is to reconnect with that deep form of being. It's always what it is. It always is reality, that deep form of being. The constant struggle to overlook it is what causes suffering. It's just a belief. think it's so deep. We think it's reality. Just like when humans thought the sun went around the earth, it seems so obvious. It was just a belief. The mind doesn't have to change or stop. The trick is to notice what we believe. The trick is believing that that is what you need. That's the problem. So the mind does what the mind does. It's going to try to take you towards more pleasure, away from fear and pain. But the trick is when you believe that that's what you need. Then you into the narrative of the mind, and that becomes your reality. Do you see what I mean? And so if you experience fear and experience pain and notice that it's effortless to experience fear and experience pain, at some point you're free from it. Free from the chains of trying to avoid fear and pain. You don't need to run towards them, but it's not where your life is about. In a sense, it's like an acquired taste, because it's easy to hear the sound of my voice right now, hopefully. But it's effortless. But hopefully it's not causing any pain. But experiences that cause fear and pain, to recognize that the experiencing of fear and pain is effortless. It's a bit of an acquired taste. So it takes a bit of time or a process to be able to recognize. That helps to notice there's something that is untouched, but it's kind of like a first step. But in general, it's a necessary step to notice that which observes effortlessly the fear and the pain is untouched by it. It's not the full enchilada, but it's a first step. In a sense, it's like separating from the body mind. What I am is confined to this body and the mind that I am. Going from that to a more unformed sense of self, a subject. And so there's a separation. That separation isn't real. And that subject isn't different from the object. But so at first, I think I'm contained and believe I'm contained in this body mind. And I can question that and experience reality as an unformed subject. But then there's another step, which is to see that all of the universe is inside of that subject, and it's the same thing. And so that's where there is no subject and there is no object. But that's another step. But the one you're describing is the one that's very regularly taught or pointed to. It is disconnected, yeah. But it's a step to see that something is untouched. But then the part that is untouched is still a subtle object. And then that can be dropped. And so then fear and pain, deepest fear and the deepest pain, that which we're avoiding, can be felt fully. And the entity that resisted it can, in a sense, dissolve. And so the fear and the pain and all of experience can be experienced fully without any form of separation. And the entity is what you believe you are. It's the I am XYZ. It's an object. And so by object, anything is an object. Anything you can describe or point to is an object. So physical, what we understand as matter, are objects, and thoughts are objects. So if I think of a unicorn, that's a real object. But it's real in the dimension of imagination, thought. The word I is an object. It's a concept. The number 3 is an object. Everything you can think of is a form of object. And whatever the mind does, it's going to be a combination of images and sounds. But those are objects. So what you perceive, what you see, what you feel, those are all objects. And there's something that is experiencing all those objects. Those objects are happening in some space, in some place. And that's what they're pointing to. What is that observing aspect? And usually we think what's observing is me, which is inside of this body. But that's actually a belief. So there's a perspective that's happening through a body. But if you look and look for that subject, you will discover it's not in the body. And that's the place where a newborn lives. That's the place from where it experiences. And we don't lose that place. It's not something that is lost. It's not that we grow up and that place evolves and goes away. What happens is the mind develops, and then it creates a map. First, a perceptual map, what reality is, and then a conceptual map of what we are inside of that reality. And so it's creating a kind of virtual world that we see as reality. And then that place that I was pointing to gets kind of hidden behind that map. And this is well known, and there's actually no debate in psychology that a baby experiences reality in that way. Fully open, fully not knowing that there's a sense of a me, a not me, a subject, an object, an I, a mother. None of that is real for the perception and the sense of self of a baby. What can be discovered is that same reality is there, that same, let's call it place, that deep sense of being and what we are that is open and undefined can be discovered as always present. And it could be seen that it was never not present. Like when you're looking for something and it's right in front of you, you don't see it, and then suddenly you see it. And you realize you've been looking at it the whole time. It's that kind of thing. And what you're looking for, what you're longing for the most in this life is something that has never gone away and has always been there and is the depth and the core of what you are. But then we believe that we're looking for something inside of an experience in this body mind that I can get to in the future. And that propagates that identification with the narrative. I am XYZ looking for ABC tomorrow or this afternoon or 5 seconds from now. And that system that's doing that, that's what is called ego. It's amazing. And that doesn't have to stop or go away. what can happen is we realize that's not what we are. It's a part of us. Like our heart, our body, mind, our ego is a part of us. It's a function. It's specifically to be able to drop very specific beliefs. But it usually requires a process because they are there for a reason and they've been helpful. One metaphor that is used is when you break a leg, you use crutches, but then your leg heals and you keep going around with crutches. And then your leg doesn't kind of recover. And then you go through life walking on crutches. So the beliefs are these crutches. And what we're longing to is to run again, but we forgot that we're going on crutches and we can't go very fast. But if we start letting them go and working your broken foot, you'll be able to run again, metaphorically. Maybe not, depends on how much you destroyed your leg, but in the sense of these beliefs, we can go back to living without them. But the part that's often not described is that it can be quite terrifying. It's in fact the most terrifying process we can go through. Particularly the beliefs I'm referring to. Yeah. And it has to do with the deepest fear, and it's the fear of death. It's usually a fear of death or of going crazy, losing control, the end of what we know, the end of the known, the cage that we are familiar with. So that aspect is the fear, but also there's pain. Because it has to do also with feeling and opening our heart. We have one belief, for example, is that we need love. And it's a crutch because we needed it when we were babies and up to a certain age. But then something changes, but it's gradual and slow, and we don't realize that the shift of needing love changes to needing to love. And whenever we go back to the belief of needing love, we contract. So one way to say it is that what you are is love. What you are is loving. That's why it needs to love. And so whenever you have some form of belief that you need love, you're in some form of self-denial. And that's suffering to go against yourself. Anything that fights with reality will cause suffering. I'm not talking about changing things. At any point today, I've not talked about changing things. So if a child is being abused in front of you, I'm not saying accepting that. I'm saying you can change that, but it's more subtle what I'm pointing to. It's the present moment. Is that very loud? I'm going to close it. One has to do with the present moment, and another one has to do with creating something from this present moment. And I'm all for change. And the point of being alive is to co-create. And that's all about movement and change. And so what I'm talking to is a very fundamental structure that is constantly saying this reality as it is not okay. And I'm not going to be okay fundamentally unless it XYZ. And it's how do we engage with reality? As I was saying earlier, we engage from the position of this is not okay fundamentally, or this is fundamentally okay. But from both places, you can engage and change things. So, for example, if a child is doing something that isn't what I think is right, I can engage in that in some way and change that, educate the child or stop the child from doing what he or she is doing. But if I come from a place that what's fundamentally happening is not okay, it's going to be projected onto the child. The child is fundamentally not okay. And I can still educate, but it'll be from a place of he or she is fundamentally not okay because reality is not okay. I'm not okay. So notice the difference. One's going to be a lot more loving than the other. If this reality is fundamentally okay, I can come to that child and do the same thing, same action. Say no, stop it, or don't put your fingers in there, or whatever. But one will come from a place of something is subtly fundamentally not okay, versus you could call it a distrust. There's a subtle judgment. The other one is a trusting, loving place. And so there's a whole other aspect that I want to talk about another session that has to do with all of the creativity that we are, and the imagination. How, I was talking in the past about the map making and imagination, and the point there is to notice to what extent what we think is reality is mind. So it's good to notice it. It's our tool, but to differentiate that from reality, so that then we can use it in a much better way. So we can use our thinking, we can use our imagination to create and to connect with what we feel and what we love at a much deeper place, because we connect to not what we think we need, because I'm not okay and I need XYZ. So that's a very limited me.